as you know, there was an incident that happened in New Orleans, and this is what CTV News brought us. It says the latest FBI investigating New Year's Day attack in New Orleans that killed at least 15 people. So the FBI is investigating an early Wednesday attack on which a U.S. Army veteran drove a pickup truck into a crowd of New Year's Day revelers in New Orleans, killing 15 people. The driver had posted videos on social media hours before the carnage, saying that he was inspired by the Islamic State group and expressing a desire to kill, U.S. President Joe Biden said. The FBI identified the driver as 42-year-old Samsu Did Bahar Jabbar. Good Lord. Trying to pronounce that name. Officials have not yet released the names of the people killed in the attack, but their families and friends have started sharing their stories. About 30 people were injured. The Superdome is completely secure, Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry said on Fox News. Again, the FBI continues to pour resources into the state. Landry said that he plans to attend Thursday afternoon's college football game between the University of Georgia and the University of Notre Dame. So they were supposed to have the Sugar Bowl, which is the college football game they have every New Year's Day. That has been postponed to, I think, today. Was it either today or yesterday that they had the game officially when this was going on? And also Super Bowl's happening in New Orleans. So this is going to cause a bit of grief and headache to that. We need not let fear paralyze us, Landry added. That's the problem in this country. We do not need that. The terrorists will win. Officials have not yet released the names of the 15 people killed in New Orleans New Year's Day, the truck attack, but their families and friends have started sharing their stories. Authorities say the driver of the pickup truck who drove through the crowd of pedestrians gathered in New Orleans' bustling French Quarter district early on New Year's Day, killing at least 15 people and injuring about 30 others. The suspect was killed in a shootout with police. The FBI is investigating the attack as an act of terrorism and said it does not believe the driver acted alone. Wednesday's attack unfolded on Bourbon Street, known worldwide as the largest destinations for New Year's Eve parties. Large crowds had also gathered in the city ahead of the college football playoff quarterfinal at the Sugar Bowl, which has been scheduled for later Wednesday at the nearby Superdome. The game was postponed until Thursday afternoon following the attack. So it happened yesterday. So here is what Joe Biden said in regard to this attack. And
now the search is
underway. He posted videos on social media indicating that he's inspired by ISIS, expressing a desire to kill. The ISIS flag was found in his vehicle, which he rented to conduct this attack.
So, I don't want to try to jump the gun on this. It's hard not to. It's really hard not to jump the gun and think how suspicious all this is. So here's a guy who was a active duty soldier, part of the U.S. military, who supposedly did not act alone, but was alone in that truck, driving through the French Quarter, which is one of the busiest districts in New Orleans. And now Joe Biden is claiming the FBI found an ISIS flag attached to all this. And considering this happened on New Year's Day with another incident that we're going to get into, on top of other incidents that happened. So this just seems a little too, as the kids would say, sus. It's a bit suspicious. It's hard not to jump to that conclusion, but all the signs are pretty much there.
Possible explosives were found in the vehicle as well, and more explosives were found nearby. The situation is very fluid, and the investigation has a preliminary stage. And the fact is that right now, there you go. The law enforcement and intelligence community are continuing to look for any connections, associations, or co-conspirators. We have nothing additional to report at this time. The investigation is continuing to be active, and no one should jump to conclusions. I've directed my Attorney General, the FBI Director, the Secretary of Homeland Security, the head of the National Counter.
I just find it hilarious that he mentioned about don't jumping to conclusions on something like this. But everything in regards of January 6th, everything in the regards of anything to do with Trump and MAGA, that they try to point the finger at one side of the country, they definitely jumped the gun on it. They definitely jumped the gun. Oh my God, there are a bunch of monsters that want to do an insurrection on the federal Capitol building. Did you look at the footage? No, they came in and stormed in and break a bunch of windows. And then what happened when they got in? No one talks about that. No one wants to discuss the fact that when they got into the Capitol, the police were giving tours. They were taking selfies with the supposed insurrectionists. Even Nancy Pelosi's own daughter, who was in the Capitol at the time, said it wasn't an insurrection. Why? Because they didn't have the proper gear. If they were trying to overthrow the government that has nuclear capabilities and tanks and other weaponry, they pretty much did a shitty job to overthrow the government. That's why we looked into it. We did our own research and looked into the fact that January 6th was in fact a federal operation. It was a psyops to demonize half the country. But people like Joe Biden jumped the gun, went to some assumptions, and tried to pin it on Trump. Just amazingly, he's saying that not to jump the gun on this. But they jumped the gun if it's easier to blame this on Trump.
Counter-Terrorism Center and the intelligence community to work on this intensively until we have a full and complete information. And once we have that information, I will share that information as soon as we can confirm it. Additionally, we're tracking the explosion of a cyber truck outside the Trump Hotel in Las Vegas. Law enforcement and the intelligence community are investigating this as well, including whether there's any possible connection with the attack in New Orleans. Thus far, there's nothing to report on that score at this time. I directed my team to make sure every resource is made available to federal, state, and local law enforcement to complete the investigation in New Orleans quickly and to make sure there's no remaining threat to the American people. And we'll support the people of New Orleans as they begin the hard work of healing. New Orleans is a place unlike any other place in the world. It's a city full of charm and joy. So many people around the world love New Orleans because of its history, its culture, and above all, its people. So I know, while this person committed a terrible assault on the city, the spirit of our New Orleans will never, never, never be defeated. It always will shine forth. We've seen that time and time again throughout its history, and I know we'll see it again in the days and weeks ahead.
There just wasn't a decency. Just like when he said about Trump's remarks about Jimmy Carter, he's not decency. I mean, this is the Joe Biden talking about making, New Orleans safe after this attack. Just to keep a reminder that this is the president, the current sitting president, before Trump gets sworn in, just weeks from now, that's actively engaging in not only a genocide that's wiping out civilization, but also leading us in the charge of World War III. Whether that being with Iran and Israel and part of the Middle East, or if that's going to be Ukraine and Russia. We don't know for sure, but either way, he's going out with a bang. And not a fun, surprise bang like, New Year's Day. So, this just seems way too all suspicious. And, considering the fact that this attack happened, while
Now
also... and here's another part of this. Texas man who backed Islamic State acted alone in New Orleans attack, the FBI says. So the FBI agents first said that he wasn't alone. Now they're saying that he was alone. And that's what it seemed like in the footage. So it just seems way too suspicious to think that an active soldier in the United States Army somehow is backed by ISIS, engaged in an attack in New Orleans. Just seems way too convenient. Way too suspicious. Concerning the fact that we're weeks before the transition of power. Just saying. But here's also the other side of the story. Because while there was the attack in New Orleans, there was also an attack in Vegas, at the Trump Hotel in Vegas. So this is from the New York Magazine Intelligencer. What we know about the Cybertruck explosion at Trump's Las Vegas hotel. So Las Vegas had their own New Year's Eve celebration. That was part of the Ryan Seacrest commotion that was going on TV. And this happened shortly after, just early morning hours of New Year's Day. So on the morning of New Year's Day in Las Vegas, a Tesla Cybertruck blew up while parked in front of the Trump International Hotel. Police say the truck's bed was loaded with gas canisters and fireworks, and that the driver died and 7 people were injured. Isn't it just a shame that they always die before we get to know who they are? The driver's motive is not yet clear, and investigators aren't yet sure if the apparent car bombing attempt is linked to the terrorist attack hours before in New Orleans, which killed at least 15 people. Below are some quick answers to big questions about the Vegas incident thus far. Around 8:40 a.m. local time, a Tesla Cybertruck stopped in front of the entrance to the Trump International Hotel, then suddenly exploded and became engulfed in flames. Police say the driver, Matthew Livelsberg, shot himself in the head before the explosion. He was the vehicle's only occupant. 7 bystanders suffered minor injuries. In the video shared of the hotel after the blast, people could seen being very carefully escorted out of the building. And firefighters put out a blaze. Police found that the truck's bed has been filled with gas canisters, camping fuel canisters, and large fireworks. It is not yet clear how the explosion was detonated. The driver has been identified as 37-year-old Matthew Livelsberg, an active duty U.S. Army Sergeant Master. So that's another active soldier. Another active soldier who was alone, who went to the Trump Hotel in the wee hours of the morning and blew himself up. Well, shot himself and then blew up the Cybertruck. Again, seems very sus, as the kids would say. Army Sergeant Master was home on leave in Colorado Springs, which is also where the Cybertruck was reportedly rented via the car-sharing app Turo. He served in U.S. Special Forces, also known as the Green Berets, and was currently stationed in Germany. So, this just gets way too interesting. Way too interesting. The timing of this, the fact that both instances were caused by people within the armed reserves, people that were active soldiers in the army. And it goes on to say there's been reports that these 2 soldiers were in Fort Bragg before this came about. And for those who don't know about Fort Bragg, I haven't gone into detail on this stream, but you can look for it for yourself. If you Google and look up on YouTube Fort Bragg, there's been some active engagement in pseudo mind control and active engagement in propaganda to use these people to deploy them as FBI agents or psyops. So this is, again, all this just seems way too suspicious to go with the original story. And if you go with the original story, well, I got some vaccines I can sell you. Let's just say that. Because these are two active soldiers in the military. Both got rented vehicles and managed to do attacks just literally hours apart from each other on the same day. On the same day. Liversburg uncle told the Independent that the 19-year-old veteran was a super soldier who loved the army and recently gotten engaged. He used to have all the patriotic stuff on Facebook. He was 100% loving the country, he continued. He loved Trump, and he was always a very, very patriotic soldier, a patriotic American. It's one of the reasons he was in the Special Forces for so many years. It wasn't just one tour of duty. The uncle, who was also surprised that Liversburg, with all the skills he learned in the Special Forces, hadn't built up a more sophisticated bomb. His wife reportedly hasn't heard from him in several days. So this is another piece to the interesting puzzle of this, that his wife hasn't heard from him in several days. Is that kind of almost similar to what we saw with Luigi Mangione, that his family hasn't heard from him in months, and then all of a sudden he was active enough to go out to Manhattan and open fire at the CEO, who he knew was coming out of that lobby at that exact moment? Just seems very, very suspicious. Again, from my perspective, I don't want YouTube to strike this down, but it just seems way too suspicious for people just to believe this random story, that this is a random guy who did a terrorist attack and attacked and engaged in warfare on people in New Orleans, the French Quarter, which is the busiest district in New Orleans, on New Year's Day. Initially, it seemed like there might have been connections between the Vegas Cybertruck explosion and the Bourbon Street truck ramming attack, which also happened on New Year's Day. The fully electric truck used in both incidences were rented via the niche car-sharing platform Turo, and both suspects had U.S. military backgrounds, with both spending time in Afghanistan and at Fort Bragg. So, two separate instances on the same day involving similar cars rented by the same app, and they're both U.S. soldiers who spent time in Afghanistan and at Fort Bragg. And nobody's done a deep investigation, at least not yet, on how suspicious this all is. Again, I can't put my foot down and confirm all this, but it does seem very, very coincidental that you have two people active in the military who came from the same Fort Bragg involved in two separate terrorist attacks just hours apart from each other. It seems way too suspicious. But on Thursday, the FBI said the suspect in the Bourbon Street attack, Shamsuddin Jabbar, acted alone, and that there was definitely no link between his alleged actions and the explosion in Las Vegas. So, here's a picture of it, and that's actually what happened. And I tweeted out with this picture here, saying, no, this is not an advert for Toyota. This is a real truck in a psyop terror stunt weeks before inauguration. Not trying to jump the conspiracy gun, but all these attack moments into 2025 seem way too suspicious. again, that's just me saying that. But anyone that goes along with the main story of this, you really, really got to look harder. And if you still believe the main story, that these are two separate attacks, that there's no connection, that the fact that they came from the same fort, the same background, both military operatives, and you're not at all concerned about that, well, then maybe I got some vaccines I like to sell you. That's all I can really say. That's all I can really say for that. Because that just seems way too suspicious for all this to occur. Here's even... So other people have commented on this. So this guy, Yuri... I can't even pronounce that. Yuri. So the dude is an active duty army. And his idea of an attack is a load a bunch of fireworks in a Cybertruck and blow it up. Seems a bit odd. So that's what he said. This guy Mercury says, notable for choosing Trump Hotel and Elon's favorite child, as if to encourage the two people who will lead this country to attack some country or group of people. Smells like a CIA playbook. So many people have commented on this. And here's this guy, End Wokeness. Although he seems more like an operative, so it may be Op Wokeness. We can change his name to. He tweeted out this. So that after these attacks in New York City, there was a Free Palestine movement. There was a march that happened, and it was organized way before these terrorist attacks occurred. So they're completely separate from the incidents that occurred. But End Wokeness wants to conflate these two. So he says New York City, 5th Avenue, just a few hours after jihadists killed 15 in New Orleans. But here's what Breakthrough News is reminding people that what you saw there, hundreds marched through New York Times Square on New Year's Day demanding an end to the U.S.-backed genocide in Palestine, which Palestine and ISIS, which the FBI is confirming this guy was tied to, are completely separate. Completely separate. And this march that was occurring days beforehand, it was already preempted. It was already signed up. They already had the legal way to do so way before any of these attacks happened. People are trying to conflate the two of them. So there's another interesting piece of this puzzle. Is this an attack to try to fully dismiss the Palestine movement? Because we already know that Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and people within the upper mega movement, they are full on board of trying to diminish the Free Palestine movement. They're trying to squash it out. They're trying to silence out college students. They want the FBI to go and raid these campuses that engage in their free speech. And they're all for censorship. They're all for tackling down dissent when it comes to genocide. So, is this potentially some sort of operation within the government to silence out the Palestine movement? Is that potentially the case? We don't know for sure, but that could be another interesting factor to all this. To the fact that you have two people who came from the same upbringing, who are both active military soldiers, coming from the same active duties, and coming from the same Fort Bragg, engaging in two separate attacks on the same day. Could that be the case? That they're trying to do preemptive attacks to scare people, not only to discourage any talks about ending the genocide, but also to ramp up World War III and to try to squash more people's rights. Because the best way to squash and go after people's civil liberties and their freedom and their expression is to scare the bejesus out of them. That's what 9/11 did. It scared the people so much that they were willing to sacrifice their rights. That's what got us the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act that was written before 9/11. So all these come into play. All these come into play. We don't know for sure, but it just seems way too suspicious on all this. And here's a final note to mention that when the FBI mentions that the guy in the New Orleans attack was involved in ISIS, keep in mind that this was an orchestration, that terrorist group that they want to conflate Palestine supporters with actually comes from the CIA, actually comes from us. The terrorist groups that we know by name, but we don't look into where they came from, comes from us. We invent terrorist groups so that we can have a war on terror and then profit off the war on terror. This is all a manufactured stunt from the get-go. And here is just an article here. This is back in 2016, where Julian Assange of WikiLeaks released 500,000 U.S. cables stating that the CIA created ISIS. And it says the bylines there, WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange today said the CIA was responsible to paving the way for ISIS as the whistleblowing organization released more than 500,000 formerly confidential U.S. diplomatic cables dating as far back as 1979. And you know, also ISIS is in bed with not just the rando in New Orleans, but also Israel. So the guy that did the terrorist attack in New Orleans is less involved with Palestine and actually more on the side of the Zionists. Because Israel also plays the factor into the formation of ISIS. Just like how Hillary Clinton admitted that the United States produced the Mujahideen that created Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And then Israel took advantage of it. Why do you think these terrorist groups don't attack Israel? Why do you think that Israeli fighters don't go after ISIS? Why do you think that's the case? Oh, because they work hand in hand. The same way Hamas originated from Israel, from the Israeli government. So they have to create the terror to manufacture fear so that we can get into preemptive wars, never-ending wars that manufactured more terror and that they could profit off of the death and disparity and the fear-mongering that they campaign towards this. So that's what it really comes down to. And I don't know exactly for sure. We don't have all the information. Obviously, this happened just, a couple days ago. We'll learn about it later on. But it just seems way too suspicious to believe anything that what you're being reported on, what you're being told in reports. It just seems way too suspicious that this guy somehow acted alone, didn't really see his family. His wife hasn't seen him in days. The two people came from the same exact uplifting, the exact same military occupation, and done two different attacks, two areas in the United States on the same day. Just seems way too, as the kids say, sus.